I love about being a panelist and presenter at LTUE is I'm an author who's toward the beginning of my career, and I get to be on the panel with rock stars. And we're going to be talking about other rock stars, which is going to be, at this, an even more interesting discussion. And so I think you guys are all pumped here, right? I've heard a lot of people talk about how excited they are, so are you guys pumped to be here? So first of all, I'll just start so I say who I am, and then hopefully you'll remember that by the end. So my name is Elle Palmer. My real name is Laura Palmer. There's a Bastille song about me. I write a series that's basically like if you take the setting of Downton Abbey and mix it with Once Upon a Time and mix it together. And then at the end, I have fortunes, and if you want to know your fairy tale future, you can have one. You guys are also welcome to have one. So if you want to know your future, that's the way to go. But I will let this illustrious panel speak for themselves.
Hi, my name is Jenniffer Wardell. I also write fantasy, and it's basically like if you took the Enchanted Forest Chronicles and let them loose on like all of fairy tales. That's basically what I do. And yeah, this is awesome. New princesses are really cool. I'm kind of starstruck. It's kind of terrifying, but...
You guys have a microphone there.
Oh, I'm keeping this one, sorry.
We can share.
Hi, my name is Rosalyn Eves, and I write YA, historical fantasy, and fantasy. My series that's out is
your mic on?
I think your mic is not.
Push it up.
There you go.
Push it up.
You got it.
Okay, let me start over. My name is Rosalyn Eves. I write YA, historical fantasy, and historical. My series that's currently out is essentially the Hungarian Revolution with magic. Also one of the newer authors on this panel, but these authors that we're talking about are the people that I grew up reading, so I'm really excited about this.
For sure. My name is Kelly Barnhill. I am the author of 4 fantasy novels for children. The Mostly True Story of Jack, Iron-Hearted Violet, The Witch's Boy, and The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which won the Newbery Medal in 2017. Still super weird to say. And that's all I'll say.
I'm Jessica Day George. I am a best-selling author of 15 books for mostly for middle grade or young adults. All of them are fantasy and include titles like Princess of the Midnight Ball, Princess of Glass, and Princess of the Silver Woods.
So first of all, the title of this panel is Not Your Ordinary Princess. So what is an ordinary princess?
I think you should start because you've written the most.
I wish to begin my remarks with a joke. My girlfriend wanted me to treat her like a princess, so I married her off to France to ensure peace. Because when I hear about princesses, that is what I'm thinking about. I actually, I think it's funny to say, oh, the new princesses are, so serious, new princesses turning it on their heads. They don't have, flocks of birdies bringing them dresses and stuff like that. They're, they're politically powerful and stuff, and I'm like, uh-huh.
Yeah,
uh-huh.
regular.
Yes. I feel like we're in perhaps a princess renaissance where we are recognizing the princesses of the past in a more realistic way. If you're not familiar with the website Rejected Disney Princesses, I believe that's what it's called.
The best.
Is it Rejected?
Yes. I think it's yeah.
It's Rejected Disney Princesses, where this guy is going through history, actual princesses, and illustrating them in a Disney style to tell their stories, which are horrifying. And there's also a recent book called Princesses Behaving Badly, which is a great resource if you're going to write about princesses, which is little biographies of rejected Disney princesses, basically. So.
That's hilarious. Yeah, when around the time when my book Iron-Hearted Violet was coming out, which I wrote because my daughters wanted me to tell them a story, and they wanted it to be about a princess, but not a pretty princess, because pretty princesses are boring. And so I wrote Iron-Hearted Violet, and as we were coming into the run-up of that publication, I started doing a series of blog posts that were all titled Badass Princesses in History. And it was really fun because there really are this whole notion of the sort of the Disneyfied princess is really kind of a modern construct. And you certainly saw very different sorts of princesses in traditional storytelling, as well as very different sorts of princesses who were actual real-life princesses. So in some ways, I do think that we do have to unpack how a lot of our ideas of what a princess is actually from the modern era and not from traditional storytelling at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is such a thing as an ordinary princess, because we have all these historical examples of princesses. We have our Disney version of princesses, and when I think ordinary princess, I think MMK's The Ordinary Princess, who is playing with all those tropes of
Amethyst Aurelia.
princess, who is playing with all those tropes, but is ultimately a very ordinary person, and it's because she's ordinary that she's able to have this extraordinary story. So I'm not sure. I mean, when we talk about more, not just your ordinary princess, I'm not even sure we have a clear benchmark on what that is.
As has been highlighted, actual ordinary princesses, like, what people don't understand is, like, the job of, like, a princess is to, like, run the kingdom. So they're basically, like, government officials. Brave actually gave, the Pixar's Brave actually gave a really good example of this. Because, like, the queen, it's just like, oh, she's a buzzkill. She doesn't want her to run around and, like, shoot arrows. No, because she wants her at home learning how to run the government.
Yeah.
And, like, in my story, Fairy Godmothers Incorporated, the youngest son, the Prince Charming, he's like a mid-level bureaucrat. And he spends most of his days in, like, meetings, paying attention to, like, farmers and trade routes. And
which is, like, very vital.
Yes, and that's, I think, really what any, like, the new princess exploration is really just going, okay, let's go beyond the trope that Disney established and sit down to what would it actually take to be a princess. And, like, history is a really good resource for that. Rejected princesses, they've moved on to, like, sometimes they'll do non-princesses, but it's just, you could sit hours reading on that website. But princesses in reality are as varied and interesting as women are.
I have to just really quick though tack on. I would never bash Disney if anyone knows me. And I just, if you look hard, I feel like in our heads, the Disneyfication is our own imagination.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Sleeping Beauty, the conflict, a great deal of the conflict in Sleeping Beauty is the fact that she has been arranged in a marriage since the day of her birth. And she fell in love with someone else, and they are telling her, nope, you have to marry this guy. And the happy ending is that it's the same guy, spoiler alert. But if you look at the Disney Sleeping Beauty, there is an arranged marriage to bring their two kingdoms together, and the fathers start fighting over where will they live and things like that. It's actually very realistic if you get right down to it. And so we in our heads are just like, oh, Aurora dances, and you always see those things where they're like, she's only on screen for 14 minutes. It's so down on women. I'm like, well, yeah, because it's Maleficent's story. But anyway, that's a different issue. But she's only on screen for 14 minutes, but the whole point of the story revolves around her. And there's arranged marriages, there's alliances between kingdoms. I mean, they really do cover a lot, but in our heads, we just see a backpack with a girl in a pink dress on it, even though her dress should be blue. And I think a lot of the idea of princesses, and we say Disneyfication because it's an easy way to, and everyone knows what we're talking about, but we're all sort of gaslighting ourselves into that's what a princess is, and that's what, people have said that's what a princess is.
And honestly, truly, Disneyfication, we're not really talking about the Disney movies.
Right.
We're talking about the Disney marketing.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, so
that is what it is.
Disneyfication, we're not talking about the movies. They're great. They're the modern version of
Well, there are fairy tales.
Yes, there are
I was just
fairy
in the
tales.
folklore panel, and we were pointing out that the Marvel and DC movies are now our
Yes.
folk tale.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, but we're talking about the Disney marketing whenever we're referring to that.
we're talking about my daughter's shoes and backpack,
Yes.
coat.
They're pretty good at that.
They are,
Yeah.
props to them.
I love the stories of real princesses, and if you actually do research on the medieval period, women in the medieval period ran the household. They were the ones who could read and write and do math because they had to run things, while men went off to the Crusades and the wars and things like that. And I think that's an interesting thing to bring into that as we're talking about historical context. And so what makes, and I think we can talk about female protagonists because in your books I know you have female protagonists that are not princesses, but what makes this great, this image of the name princess, what do we see that makes that such a great protagonist that we're drawn to?
I wonder if some of it has to do with growing up in the society we do, especially as young girls when we are exposed to the idea of princesses. There's something about the actual power of that position. When you're young and when you don't have a lot of position and maybe you don't have a lot of money, there's a lot of appeal in this idea of a woman who has power or has access to power. And I also want to kind of push on we're kind of knocking marketing, which I think deserves it sometimes, but I also think there's something about that appeal of pretty things, and I think I want to push back a little bit against the social idea that just because something is something that young girls like, it means that it's trivial or silly. Because I think, why can't you have the beautiful dress and hold the throne? But I think, for me at least, reading the stories of these princesses, my first exposure to princesses was looking for somebody like me. My favorite princess story as a child was this version of Sleeping Beauty where she had long, curly red hair. Because it was the first time I'd seen, and this is really silly because it's just hair color, but it was the first princess that looked like me but gave me access to a world where I felt like I could be something bigger or be something better.
Yeah, for sure. The in my book, Iron-Hearted Violet, I mean, one of the things that the character struggles with is this disconnect between what she perceives she looks like and what sort of the standard of beauty is in her culture, and she's just not that. And so she is reading all of these stories of princesses, and that's not her, and that causes her a lot of pain. But when she actually does wish for beauty and she gets it, nobody knows who she is, right? And it causes even more pain and more sorrow. And so I do think that that on one hand we do really need to recognize that that I think that you're really right. This notion that because young girls like it and because it's beautiful, it's somehow less. And I think that we do really need to notice ourselves doing that and guarding against it, because that's just one other way to discount and devalue, and we don't want to do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that's the thing. The reason why princesses are so popular in fiction, and we say the not the ordinary princess, but the truth is we're not really knocking the traditional vision of princesses, because the truth is we all grew up with it.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think you did, there was a part in your life where you dreamed about being a princess, or all your protagonists were princesses, because when we're kids, the fairy tales women get, the heroines, they usually ended up being princesses. And so I think the adult, or the young adult, putting them in fiction and stuff and exploring things is not so much rejecting the childhood, but sort of expanding it and finding a way that we can all live in the princess. So it's not really rejecting princesses, it's opening the door wider. Because I was obsessed with fairy tales my whole life, but I was a round, sarcastic, dark-haired girl, and when I was a kid, there were no princesses that looked like me. They were all skinny and blonde and pretty. No offense to blondes. My best friend is a blonde. As a child, I hated you all.
And we love her anyway.
But so really, like I said, I agree that I think the title of the panel may give the wrong impression, because the thing is, we would not be here if we did not love princesses.
Yes.
We would not write endlessly about them if we did not love princesses. We're just sort of pushing the door open wider and carving a space where we can all be the princesses we truly are.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
that was great.
That was awesome.
How many of you guys are wearing a fancy dress in your head right now? Like, I am a princess right now. Jessica, do you have anything to add to?
No, that was fantastic.
Okay.
Love it.
We'll just let your mic drop right there. So talking specifically about books, we had a little bit of a discussion here that certain people on this panel also helped start this genre in addition to the authors that we have listed. So one of the questions I had is, we've talked about Disney movies and how much an influence is that, and I think we can extend that to the original Grimm's fairy tales and Christian Perrault's Sleeping Beauty and Hans Christian Andersen. But also,
Horrible man.
what books growing up or even as adults have influenced you in your love of this genre of the princess and what that means?
Sorry, I will talk about Patricia Wrede at every opportunity.
Wrede.
Sorry, I just found that out. Her last name is Wrede.
It's like finding out that it's supposed to be the sword of Shannara. It's just your brain's going to reject it no matter how many times you hear it.
So when I was a teenager, I found the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, Princess Cimmerine.
Yes.
Changed my life. I was also dark-haired, obsessed with dragons, and wanted to do things that my father did not want me to do. So she was just, honestly, the influence of her is in every single thing I write. And like I said, these days there's a lot more princesses to choose from, but back when I was a kid, Cimmerine was pretty much all I had, and I loved her.
Mm-hmm. One of mine was Robin McKinley's Erin in The Hero and the Crown.
Yes.
That was my first ever fan fiction was rewriting the ending of that book.
Because why? Like,
I don't remember why. I think we had a challenge to try and do something.
Oh,
but,
okay. Not like, so she's like, no, she left Boring Tor and just went back to
well,
Luth
I think
right
she
away.
went back to Lutha. Yeah,
Okay,
I think it was something
right away.
like that.
Yeah.
But for me, this was the first time I remember reading a female hero who was strong and who was actually the hero, but not in a way that felt unreachable. Like, she felt like somebody who was ordinary who would become extraordinary. And I really think she's the reason that I write YA fantasy. Mm-hmm. I'm also curious that thinking about the rise of like the princess culture in Victorian society, I wonder how much of that has to do with Queen Victoria, who was sort of this romanticized, idealized princess who became queen. And I'm just curious, this had nothing to do with the panel, but it just occurred to me like that might be part of what fosters this interest in princess
Victoria
culture.
started a lot of things that I like. The white wedding dresses are just because she started that fashion. It has no deep symbolism whatsoever. Victoria chose white. We're all going to use white now.
Yeah.
She did a lot.
Panel presentation for next year, Queen Victoria, an influence on everything.
We should. I was just saying the other one. She started a whole dynasty. Literally every European royal family now is related to Victoria.
Yeah, every single one.
She had like 25 daughters.
There's a lot of hemophilia.
That's why there's a lot of.
She was a carrier of
She was a carrier of hemophilia.
Yeah, so fun fact. It used to be blue. They used to wear blue in weddings, which would have been so much better for my skin tone. So, just saying. I mean, for me, I was a fairy tale kid, and I was a fairy tale kid in a super obsessive, weird way. I was a fairy tale kid who learned how to use interlibrary loan in 4th grade so that she could find more fairy tales. That was me. And when you do deep dives in fairy tales, you find all kinds of really interesting princesses. You find all kinds of princesses who become princesses because they are extremely clever, and that is and it sort of wows everybody. So that was awesome for me. But you also find princesses who save the day by carrying their loved one on their backs, right? You find there's a story that comes from, I think, Romania, called The Princess Who Becomes a Boy, who, guess what, gender swaps and becomes a boy at the end. The spoiler alert in the title. There's all kinds of really transgressive storytelling that happens in traditional storytelling, which is very interesting. There's a collection that I would highly recommend actually to everybody if you ever want to read some really bonkers short fairy tales, because one of the things that the Grimms did when they were out gathering their stories, in this idea that modernity is going to take away all of our traditional storytelling, which was likely true, each edition altered the pattern of the story, and trying to reformat things into more modern narrative norms, and it's closest to the original in the first edition, but even that was a lot of alterations. They had a contemporary who was gathering stories in different parts of Germany, or what is now Germany, over closer towards where the Czech Republic is, and he was just transcribing them as they found them. So I don't know if you guys remember this, that they found this manuscript of unpublished fairy tales in a vault in a castle in Germany. So awesome. They found 500 of them, and the collection, they have a small collection of them called the Turnip Princess, and it's by I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, you know what? Google exists and you can find it. Anyway, it's fantastic because they're baffling and abrupt and strange, but you can find all kinds of really unusual and very cool princesses, including ones that have to do with turnips. So there you go.
The Turnip Princess, available as a Penguin classic.
Yes.
And it's Franz Xavier von Schonwert.
Very German.
Von Schonwert. So
I was going to say Franz something German.
Yes, and you were not wrong. The last name is V-O-N, not capitalized, but then it's capital S-C-H-O-N-W-E-R-T-H.
It's magnificent, really.
Oh,
Schonwert.
Pretty Garden, right?
And today we can learn that's pronounced Schönwerte,
Or Pretty, no.
since everything's pronounced a different way than we thought.
I don't know.
It could be a lot of things. It could be sausage. She's like, what's the Wert? I'm like, it could have been Wurst back in the day, but then they became a von, which indicates nobility, and now they're, anyway. Okay. What were we supposed to be saying? Like stuff we kind of grew up with? Or
What books kind of influenced you to have your passion for princesses?
Mm-hmm. And this is gonna sound super weird because I do love princesses, and I loved The Ordinary Princess by MMK.
Yeah.
But I always remember, and this will come as a surprise to no one who has read my book Dragon Slippers, where her ultimate goal is not to be a princess but to be a dressmaker to the princess. I loved it when someone was described having a beautiful gown. That is what I wanted. I didn't even necessarily want to be a princess, but I wanted to have a beautiful gown. I was the child sitting there every Sunday at church with the full crinoline under my dress and a lace-edged handkerchief that my grandmother had given me tucked into my sash that I would never use because disgusting. But I have passed that on to my daughter, by the way. It is a genetic condition. So I loved the stories. I loved The Last Unicorn, which I probably read and watched far too young.
Yes.
But the description of when she is lady, I love transformation stories of any kind. Mm-hmm. And spoiler alert, the last unicorn. The unicorn is changed into a woman that they call the Lady Amalthea. And they make her a silk gown, but because Molly Grew, who makes her the silk gown, is not good with sewing and uneasy with the silk, is what they said, because she'd never sewn it before. She's uneasy with the silk. The gown is lavender and does not fit her very well, but she still looks so radiant in it. And I just imagined this dress almost like a shell that maybe wasn't fitted right around her waist or something like that. And that's all she's wearing, but not in a pervy way, people. I was a very young child, okay? But just like, I imagined the feel of that silk on her skin, and that's what I always wanted, is to be like encased in this silk gown. So anytime there was somebody that it really got into their dresses, like I was talking to the other panel about the Norwegian story of Kari Woodenskirt, which is basically the Norwegian Cinderella, and Kari Woodenskirt's skirt is made from the bark of the tree she prays to for help. But it's these woven strips of bark so fine that it ripples like water and looks like brown water in a stream and feels like silk, and it's woven out of strips of bark. And you cannot even imagine the hours I spent imagining how good that would feel to wear that skirt, you know? I was in it for the clothes. And that's why I say when we talk about marketing, like, you know, that is why I buy my daughter the Disney princess shoes and stuff like that, because that I wanted to look like a princess, and I love stories where someone got to look like a princess, got to eventually become the princess. So anything where there was sort of a transformation, someone shapeshifted into something else, I was all about this. So the Ordinary Princess, I actually, and I know it's not a princess story, but in my head it is. But if you've ever read 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit, I'm a huge E. Nesbit junkie, but at one point they asked to be as beautiful as the day. Because that is the wish of one of the sisters, and they don't recognize each other. But like, they want, and Jane's hair is simply carrots. Right. Some sisters are redhead now, and they're all horrified. But I love those stories, like her Book of Dragons, the way she described the princesses, you know, and the dragons and the princesses and stuff in her Book of Dragons short stories was so appealing. And then, yes, I discovered, I'm old though, so I wasn't a child, but I discovered, you know, the Dealing with Dragons and Princess Cimarine, and loved the fact that her long dark hair, even though it was, you know, she's dark hair and all her sisters are blonde, but there was just, I'm like, I want to touch her hair. The way Patricia Wrede described Cimarine's hair and the treasure and the dragon scales and the clothes she was, her apron tied over her silk princess gown, I want to touch it. Like, that was what was so appealing to me.
I want to see you on Project Runway and just magically give you all the skills you need. And just do princess gowns on Project
That would be
Runway.
so cool.
I'd watch that.
Touch it. No, I just want to be a judge on there and just go around and go, I just feel like, no, this has terrible feel. I reject this grass dress. This is horrible.
The dresses we're imagining we're wearing, has those developed even further now? Are there any princesses from non-Western cultures that you find really interesting?
Interesting.
Now we put everybody in.
Yes.
I know.
Crickets chirping in the
Go. Oh, if crickets are going to chirp,
Do it.
let
Do
me
it.
go. I was so obsessed, again, the feel of the silk. The Tale of Genji, if you've read that. One of the first novels ever written by a woman, thank you very much. It's a Japanese novel. And then of Nightingales That Weep by Catherine Patterson, who wrote Bridge to Terabithia. She spent many years of her life living in Japan, and she wrote several stories set in Japan, feudal Japan, that are absolutely stunning. Of Nightingales That Weep is hands down my favorite of her books. And she also did one like,
It sounds so good.
it is about that time that there was a great feud between basically there was a child emperor on the throne, and they tried to assassinate him, and there was the Heike and the Genji tribes, and this girl is an attendant to the empress. And I loved that, and the roles of the women of the court and how they described it, and very prescribed roles. You could not be looked at by a man they had screens between you and the men. Even your own father, her father comes to visit her, and she sits behind a screen, and she can't even tell if he's there or not until he starts talking, because you could not be looked at by a man. And to get to be able to comb the princess's hair was like a ranking, like official combed the princess's hair and things like that. And these are people, they prided themselves. You're probably picturing, when you say Japan, you're probably picturing basically geisha hair up with the pins in it. No, in this time period, they wore their hair down, and the length of your hair was very important to your status. And the princess at the time, Princess Aoi, her hair went all the way down to the floor. And only a woman of noble birth was allowed to touch, wash, or comb her hair. And so those princesses are their lives were very proscribed. At the same time, they were known for their painting, their novel writing, their poetry writing. To get to have the princess compose a poem about you was a huge honor. So, I mean, it's very much that they're the women in the house that are actually doing the writing. They kept the accounts. They are the abacus. An abacus is a woman's tool. They kept the household accounts, even at that level of imperial government. And there were child emperors because the father would step down in favor of his beautiful son who was an infant. And then the people running the court were the mother and the grandmother and the potential bride, and there's just this baby on the throne, and so it was the women. And I love that. And Of Nightingales That Weep is a really accessible, because some of it is very difficult to read because it's so different and there's a lot of scholarly stuff about it, but if you're looking for a real good novel, Of Nightingales That Weep by Catherine Patterson is where to go. That's the fabulous one that she really just like encapsulates it in a really accessible way for people to read.
Thank you, because you reminded me of mine. Yes. When it's not like technically she wasn't Princess Solvarian, but as part of my whole obsessed with fairy tales period when I was a kid, like I did this whole run where I read like every version of Cinderella I could get my hands on.
Oh yeah.
And there are so many versions of Cinderella.
Who here also, yes, every version of Cinderella you could get your hands on. Yes, okay.
And it was just
we're all
like,
guilty.
I was pretty young, but it was a fascinating look at different cultures. Because like in is it the Japanese or the Chinese one where the fairy godmother's a fish?
Chinese.
I was pretty sure. It's Chinese. But the fairy godmother's a fish, and like the emphasis on the dead mother and the tree, and like you could see like the values of the cultures and what happy endings meant and what mattered in how they told the story of Cinderella, and I loved that. It was just. Because it was just like with all fairy tales, it was like the stories you tell are a reflection of who you are and your time period and your people. And princess stories often really show that in a way that's accessible to so many people, including this small child who was obsessed with fairy tales.
A lot of them, it's the beauty of the princess is not revealed until the end. We were just talking about it in the folklore one, where a lot of those original stories were she was a goddess that had fallen to earth, sort of, or married a god and was a plain, ordinary person. But cleverness is valued, a good heart and honesty is valued, and then when you ascend to heaven to marry the god, you are revealed. But it doesn't even say like, oh, and golden locks and big blue eyes or something like that. It's you're so radiant because you are a goddess that people can't look at you. You're so beautiful. So it's a very interesting. I love it.
Yeah, there's another one too. There's a Japanese story called The Towers of the Moon. It's a really, really old story, but it's another one of those stories where it's an infant moon goddess who accidentally falls to Earth. And what's interesting about that story is this question of who do I belong to? Do I take on my role as a goddess, or do I stay true to the parents who loved me and raised me, and this love interest that I have? It's a really wonderful story. They made it into an opera a few years ago.
Wow.
It's a beautiful opera.
What was the name of that?
The Towers of the Moon.
Ooh, let me just quickly recommend, by the way, on that theme, Bridge of Birds by Barry Huart, which is a probably about 20-year-old fantasy novel, and it is, yeah, it's a goddess who has fallen to earth and has forgotten who she is. And there are clues throughout about her nature and stuff like that. And when you find out who the goddess is, it's very interesting. And the decision of whether to be an ordinary person or to be a goddess is a very interesting situation, conundrum, whatever. Huart, like Hughart, Barry Huart.
So my recommendation is much more recent, but Roshni Chakshi's The Star-Touched Queen picks up on a lot of really familiar princess tropes. You know, the daughter of a father whose realm is in some sort of jeopardy, so he marries her off to a distant king. But it also feels very classic in terms of, it kind of feels like a retelling of the Cupid and Psyche myth. That she marries this distant, powerful person, but there's a lot about the person she married that she doesn't understand. And the way she tells the story is really beautiful. But it also taps into a mythology, Indian mythology that we don't see very often.
Cool. So we've got about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to open it up to questions from our very excited group out here. Try not to get your pearls tangled in your dress. To raise your hands. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I didn't catch the name of the last book that was mentioned.
Oh, sorry.
The title is The Star-Touched Queen by Roshni Chakshi. It's Chokshi.
Thank you.
All right, so do we have any questions for our remarkable panelists? Yes, ma'am.
If you're writing a retelling and you find that the fairy tale you're retelling, sometimes the woman is given kind of a reactive role rather than an active role. What are some tools that you use to create a more active protagonist in that character?
Okay, so you're basically asking how do we move a character who in the original fairy tale might have been reactive into being a proactive role?
The princess saves herself in this
I actually recently ran into that problem. Because the problem with Sleeping Beauty is the heroine spends most of it asleep. And so there, I think what you do is you go in and you mess with the fairy tale. Because that's what the fairy tale is for. It just starts the toolbox, you play with it however you want. In mine, I both made her a sorceress, so she has the tools to start attacking it. And I sort of change it around, so like it starts breaking down, and like the sleeping spells hit her early, but are relatively brief, so she can wake up in the middle. But basically, yeah, you just turn the story inside out if you have to, but give her more choices, give her more agency, and it'll transform the story.
Maybe pinpoint the person who is doing the acting for her, like the person who is saving her, and get rid of them. A princess doesn't need a prince to be a princess, but like, you know, if there's like a helpful this or that, or a wise old somebody that's doing a lot of the talking or a lot of this decision making, get rid of them. Give their lines to the princess. Make them the lesser character and push her forward. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you could also flip it, too, so that if you're worried that the princess is the one that's passive, you can flip it so that her romantic interest is the one that's passive, and she's the one that's doing the action.
Yeah. One last thing, too. I think it's really important to press against what we think the normal way of the story happens is, right? I live in Minnesota. Right next to us is Wisconsin, and you guys may have heard of this young woman who was kidnapped and saved herself, right? Jamie Kloss. We have been, my whole state has been basically holding its breath for 4 months, but I started doing some research, and these stories usually have terrible endings, but in almost every single case of these when people are held for a long time, it is the young woman who saves themselves in almost every single time. If they survive, it is because they made themselves survive. And I think that is really important to remember. This whole notion of somebody being rescued doesn't happen in real life. They have to save themselves. And so if we remember that, I think that we can tell more authentic stories.
I feel more empowered.
Yeah, right?
We'll do you, and then we'll do you.
So all of you have written, published these like princess type stories. So what tips do you have for those of us who are also writing these to like own it? To be like, when people say, well, what kind of story are you writing? You say, well, it's a princess story. Like, how do you own it? Like, what drives from like, oh, I write princess stories to I write princess stories.
Your tone of voice did a lot with that.
Good job answering questions. No. Do you guys have anything to add of owning the princess story?
One of the things that we've touched on is the fact that these princesses aren't just a trope, they're a bunch of individuals. And I think for me, part of owning, I mean, mine's not a princess, but she is born into the nobility. And for me, a lot of that was owning her arc as a person and deciding what kind of story that I wanted to tell. For me, at least, it was really important that I read a lot of 19th century stories where these characters are sort of exceptionally heroic in the context of their time, and it was really important for me to write a story about a girl who is still recognizably feminine in terms of what was important to her culture, and still manages to be strong. So I think figuring out who the character is, rather outside of the princess role, and owning that can help too.
Two things. One, like we said, do not be ashamed of princesses. Do not be ashamed of wanting to be a princess. There's something very, I think it taps into a sort of like primal feminine thing that is just really okay. Two, the truth is, I am writing the princess stories that I wished was on the shelf when I was a teenager. And so I'm writing for past me, and I know that there are other girls out there, or girls my age, who still love reading YA because it is one of the coolest genres out there. And there's nothing to be ashamed of that. You're writing stories that may help a girl out there feel less alone, shape who she is, realize that she can also be a princess. These are important stories, and we need to remember that.
Also, this is why I never tell people I'm a writer, ever. I swear to God, I don't. I feel like a spy. Because no matter what, like, I mean, in the end, there's always people that are going to discount what you do, and that should never stop you from doing the thing, right? I write children's fantasy novels. I get a lot of withering stares, and who cares, right?
Maybe one day you'll be good enough to write for adults.
You know what? I get that all the time. I was just the other day. I was having this conversation with a graphic designer because I was, I sort of was talking about what I write and how I just had a collection for adults come out. Oh, you must be so proud of yourself now. And I was just like,
I have a gold medal.
My book is in 38 languages. Yeah, I think I'm ready for but so no matter what, like that's why I don't like talking about my career with people, because it's just never a satisfying conversation. So you know what?
You're gonna run into people who are excited for you and people that are idiots. So just
ignore the haters.
You just smile and talk about the weather, and then go do what you do, and that's the only thing that matters.
I think you're doing okay.
I could buy.
It's fine.
What are your favorite elements or tropes in traditional fairy tales to turn on its head? Like, for example, in Gail Carson Levine's Sleeping Beauty retelling, like, the gifts that the fairy gives are really annoying because a talking baby's super annoying. Boring prince who's perfect, super boring. Like, what are your guys' favorite things to look at and say, ooh, I could change this?
And also Spindle's End by Robin McKinley, which is like the fact that she has golden curls like golden goblets. And so she keeps basically shaving her head because can you imagine these big boingy goblet-wide curls on her face? Yeah. Anyway, I personally love to take something like, here is this absolutely stunningly beautiful princess, you know, the blonde hair, blue eyes, or long, thick black tresses, and she's a genius.
Yeah.
You know, I love to take that. Yes, she's exactly what you're expecting. She's beautiful, well-dressed, and super smart. I actually made a joke, a Mean Girls joke, in one of my Tuesdays at the Castle books, because their oldest sister, very obsessed with fashion, always doing and curling her hair and stuff like that, is actually this huge history buff, knows everything about about history and the history of their castle and all this stuff, but is mostly obsessed with boys and clothes because those are her immediate interests. And at one point they say, they're like, how did she know that? And they're like, that's why her hair is so big, it's full of secrets. No one has ever flagged that I stole that line from Mean Girls. But like, I love that because no one, even her own family, is not expecting Lila to go like, this looks like a 5th century tapestry. It shouldn't be in this hallway. There's something going on here. And they're just like, that's my favorite.
Yeah, one of the things that I had a lot of fun with when I was writing Iron-Hearted Violet is that when she becomes beautiful, like a lot of these things are really annoying, right? She gets this like thick hair that goes down to her knees. She's like, oh my God, like trying to like move it around and weighs a lot. Hair is really heavy.
That's my favorite.
and she has these tiny feet, and she's like tripping everywhere because she's now really clumsy. Like it's real. Like a lot of these things are really frustrating. And why is that a standard of beauty anyway? So things like that I think are fun to play with.
How about you?
I'm still thinking.
Sort of just branching off of that, one of my favorite things to always play with in princesses or any fairy tales is to take this common thing and sit down and go, it's sort of the Terry Pratchett thing. How would this work in real life?
Yeah.
What would it be like if you had to
Terry.
live with this day to day? How would this work in an actual functioning society? Generally, when you do that, the results are hilarious or at least super interesting. And so I just like taking things apart and seeing how they work. And
I think anytime you get something unexpected, like taking things to their literal conclusion, or I just really love the ordinary princess, that how shocked and horrified everybody is that she's going to be ordinary. Like anytime, and the fact that the wicked old step or fairy or whatever is not really wicked, she's just grumpy because she's a water witch and she's dried out. Like anytime you can take something that people think they know and making it new again, I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so unfortunately, I think we're all disappointed to know we're out of time. This has been fun.
Gotta go.
So,
Gonna be great.
just a quick plug of the next panel or next project.
Do you know about the
Do you want to see where you're going next?
There is one.
I'm going to be at the Road Doll panel at 4. Come
Like
say
across
hi.
where they've got that desk.
I have 2 more. I'm going to be on the writing excuses panel, and I'm also doing my very favorite workshop at the end of the day on how to write emotion, sort of moving beyond showing and telling. It's this thing called the objective correlative, which sounds really impressive, but it's actually really fun to talk about.
I'm giving a keynote right now. Just keep your expectations low. It's real weird. And then I'm on the generating ideas panel and how to write a great first page panel, and then the writing excuses. Okay, I gotta go. Bye.
I'm gonna go get ready. I will be sitting in Kelly's keynote, and then after that, though, at noon, I will be doing a reading of some new unpublished something surprise at noon in Sycamore, along with Natalie Whipple, and we both have things to give away, prizes if you come.
So thank you all for coming.